Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Aico TV. I'm Alex Garmston.
And I'm Holly Moore.
This week we've got some exciting news to start this episode with. We've recently been shortlisted for the Electrical Wholesaler Awards and we've been shortlisted in 3 categories. That's brilliant, but we cannot win these awards without you voting for us. So coming across the bottom of the screen now will be the link to the website. If you could go to the website and vote for us, that would be brilliant. But we have got an exciting episode coming up for you, and here's what's coming up. We have our Relationships Manager, Tina Mistry, talking to Alistair McIntosh from Housing Quality Network and the partnership we formed with them.
This will be followed by our Regional Specification Manager, Andy Sturgess, who's going to talk to us about process mapping for the SmartLINK Gateway.
Then we are going to look at some footage we captured before Christmas with our Regional Specification Manager, Gregor Morrison, talking about the standards in Scotland.
And once again, we'll finish up with an FAQ, and this week we'll look at how to dispose of your alarms.
Recently, we've had the pleasure of working with Housing Quality Network, and last week our Relationships Manager, Tina Mistry, had the pleasure of interviewing Alistair McIntosh from Housing Quality Network on Zoom. They were talking about the partnership that we formed with them and what Housing Quality Network offers the industry. Let's take a look at that interview and see how they got on.
Hello, I'm Tina Mistry, the Relationship Manager at Aico. We've got a great guest here with us today. Alistair's from HQN. Alistair, do you want to tell everybody who you are and what you do at HQN?
Hi, thanks for inviting us. I'm Alistair McIntosh. I'm the Chief Executive of HQN, and I try and bring a small degree of order to the activity of our many people.
And we're working in partnership with yourselves, but it'd be really good to understand, why did HQN get set up and what was the reasonings behind it?
Sure, yeah. Well, in the midst of time, back in the late 90s, a Labour government came in. They were committed to improving the quality of social housing management, and we set up the Housing Quality Network at that stage to support that initiative and to drive improvement across housing associations and local authorities. We, in fact, did the first ever independent inspection of housing in Liverpool back in, I think, 1999. The Director of Housing at Liverpool then became the Chief Inspector for the North of England. Inspection lasted for many, many years, and we were, I guess, the leading independent advisors to local authorities, housing associations and ALMOs that wanted to improve their services. What was interesting at that stage is that if a local authority's arm's length management organisation passed an inspection, it unlocked additional finance. So it was an incredible programme of incentives and carrots, not just sticks at that time.
Where about geographically? What areas do you cover geographically across the nations?
Well, we're based in York, and very much hoping that Boris Johnson brings the House of Lords to York, so we've got a bit of company. I myself live in London's glamorous Upper Holloway or Lower Hilldrop. No one can ever quite make their mind up. But we cover the whole of the United Kingdom. We've got Keith Edwards buzzing away in Wales. Lydia Deboa has done quite a bit of consultancy in Ireland, and every now and again I go back up to Scotland. So we're UK wide.
And do you see much of a difference between different nations?
It's a difficult one. Amongst our members, they tend to be ethical and community focused. In England, undoubtedly, housing has become very business orientated. The number of housing associations with more than 1,000 homes have halved from 2011 to now, from about 400 down to 210. Quite a bit of business orientation. In Scotland, and more particularly Wales, there's a real community focus. So the mutuals are a little bit on the march in Wales in terms of organisations that are formally mutual and organisations that adhere to those principles. So yeah, there are some differences across the nations, and you would expect that with devolution. In the past, all that happened is that a policy would come out of London, it'd be wrapped in a shortbread tin for Scotland, and that was that. So it's probably better now that policies and practices are developed at the country level. Could go further and be a little bit more regional.
Do you also see the difference between urban and rural?
You do, yes. That is a factor. I mean, certainly in England, London is a case apart, isn't it? I mean, London, Manchester, bits of some other northern cities are, Guardian, Reading, Metropolitan, think along a certain way. The rest of the country is, of course, much more inclined towards conservatism. That said, when you work with the housing associations and councillors right across England, they do tend to have very similar values and tend to be very pro-resident. And the ones we see are certainly pro-social housing.
And if we look at what's happened over social housing over many years, things have changed, but some things have actually not changed at all, or progressing. But I mean, we're talking about the 4 key agendas in social housing. So you've got the shortfall of social housing, people talk about building safety, the social housing white paper, and we're talking about net zero. Some of those agendas are newer agendas, but resident engagement is not a new agenda, is it?
No. I mean, what fascinated me is the English regulator published its global accounts last week for all the associations with more than 1,000 homes in their stock. And glacial progress in terms of supply. The stock increased a mere 1.3%. Now, in the past, some people, particularly Policy Exchange, have questioned the point of social housing organisations because they're not building enough social housing. So you get that taking in one direction, and then the demand for safety and the demand for decarbonisation on the other. It's a very difficult balancing act for the English associations as we head into the future.
I think it's a difficult time within social housing. There's so much, isn't there? You've got that building safety aspect to consider.
Yeah.
Then they've got the net zero, because we've all committed to this target for climate change. We've got COP26 happening in later this year in Glasgow. And then we've got resident engagement, almost as though it's resident engagement pulling everything together, because it doesn't matter what agenda it is, it's just that holistic approach to safety overall, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, certainly the Hackett report emphasised very strongly the need to take residents with us on safety in terms of eyes and ears, and in terms of people to be consulted on safety. It's just fascinating to see where we will find the incredible sums of money to decarbonise the stock and what impact that will have on services. And we talk about resident engagement. There's so many different types now, isn't there? If you go on Trustpilot, the bigger English associations are being hammered into the ground routinely. So they've got no trouble at all in getting engagement. Whether that translates into meaningful service improvements is something very, very different. And then in other parts of the country, the housing associations and councils barely feature on the internet, and people are having to use traditional methods like getting out there, using shoe leather, phone calls, public meetings, and all the rest of it. So, it's becoming a much more diverse sector in terms of how resident engagement works.
And the resident engagement is the heart of everything. And we talk a lot about culture change and all HA and local authorities. And the building safety talks about its culture change. But from your perspective, you've worked in the social housing sector for some time. Do you really think that culture change is something that can be addressed, or is it something that's always going to be sit there on the shelf as a book to discuss?
I think it's changed phenomenally. We went too far down the business route. That is for sure. I mean, culture change 8 or 9 years ago was about purging residents from boards and providing the minimum level of service in order to grow effectively. Culture change today is very different, isn't it? It's about engaging your current residents and getting that right before charging off to build the New Jerusalem. So we'll always reflect society, won't we? I would imagine after austerity, everyone was very keen on really sort of locking down, batting down the hatches. As we come through this lockdown, this COVID crisis, it's no surprise that folk are trying to pull together. I mean, you go for the queue for your jab, you can only get it from NHS. There is no private sector override. You know, I went to the Crick Centre down in Camden. Every social class, every ethnicity, every stripe of view, all in the same queue, waiting for the NHS. And I just wonder, waiting quite happily for the NHS, by the way, I wonder what impact that will have on society. Will it pull us together, or will better off people look for overrides as they did in the past?
I think it's interesting. I think we talk about some of the areas around that rural urban aspect of it. We talk about fuel poverty, a new definition of fuel poverty. But then you've got, well, with the retrofit challenge, it's really difficult because you've got asset rich but fuel poor. The lines aren't defined anymore, are they? Society isn't defined anymore.
No, I think what's really going to be quite telling is how we deal with our classic, beautiful Victorian, Edwardian and Georgian properties in our city centres, particularly London. I mean, you talk to housing association chief executives, they're tearing their hair out about the costs of decarbonising those properties, make them more fuel efficient. Residents in the main are saying you don't sell off the crown jewels. And even Kensington and Chelsea Council has signed up to Extinction Rebellion's agenda. And you look at the properties they've got, some of the beautiful classical properties they've got, you wonder how we can actually square the circle.
And I think it goes back to that holistic approach. With the retrofit challenges, it's difficult because you've got properties that are 1920s and 1930s. Then you've got 40s to 50s and 60s. And then you've got building control that came into place and building regulations that came into 80s. There's a whole different type of archetypes to deal with, not just on a net zero conversation, but building safety. I mean, how do you create, and it's a challenge. I think it's interesting. I don't know what you're seeing as well. It's right across all four nations.
Yeah.
Everyone's got a different challenge in some sort of way, and they're being pulled by pillar by post in terms of what becomes a priority. And what's your thoughts? Do you think it should be one priority over another, or do you think it should be just having a holistic approach to what they're doing?
Well, it reminds me of the situation we found ourselves in the late 1990s. Investment in council housing had gone down considerably since 1979 for obvious reasons. Tony Blair comes in, he sat there in front of a colossal bill to improve council housing as we are today, and his answer was to introduce a competitive element and give the funding to the organisations that passed inspection tests. And you wonder if, I mean, I'm not advocating this, but it certainly needs to be considered, should local authorities and associations be required to come forward with well-informed, properly planned approaches to decarbonisation, and then be given additional funding to achieve that, provided the plans are decently put together and provided they are good stewards of the stock, and you would test the quality of their stewardship via inspection, as we did before.
And where do you see building safety fitting into that?
Well, building safety would certainly be part of any inspection regime. I mean, what is interesting, so many different approaches to building safety. The health and safety executives' approach to it, that regulator. We've got the regulator for social housing insisting that you've got a nominated person on safety, a nominated person on consumer regulation. And I think that what we need to focus on is the infrastructure that supports those nominated persons rather than just the nominated person itself. So we need well-qualified experts managing the stock, making sure it's safe and reporting up to that nominated person rather than just leaving someone hanging on some hit and hope approach.
And it is about everyone taking that sense of responsibility, isn't it? There's two parts of responsibility. There's responsibility internally within the social housing sector. So it's within each HA and local authority. but there's also sharing of best practice amongst peer-to-peer. But then we look at the resident perspective. The residents equally need to be having that sharing of best practice amongst themselves and peer-to-peer support again. I think there's that whole notion of taking everybody on a journey together, isn't there?
Yeah, and certainly the academic research on new, emphasise new, decarbonised properties, fuel efficient properties, is that we don't ever listen to the residents enough. We design properties to meet a theoretical standard. A resident goes in, and of course, it never matches the conditions designed in a laboratory, so we never get the savings and efficiency we anticipate. And what the academics are suggesting is that the same way when you buy a car, it's been prototyped and road tested, then our approach to decarbonisation should be prototyped and road tested so they know that it works with real people rather than theoretical people.
I mean, we're working with yourselves in the partnership, and I think the brilliant work that you do at HQN, because you've got different networks, haven't you?
We do, yeah. We cover repairs, resident engagement, safety, asset management, income collection. I mean, income collection's been incredible during the lockdown, hasn't it? It's not deteriorated anything like the extent to which people anticipated with the eviction ban. And one of the reasons for that is landlords are phoning up offering to help folk now rather than threaten them. They're handing out their own mobile phone numbers, they're communicating in text that makes sense to younger people, they're offering free internet in order to keep in touch with folk. So that whole moving into a more friendly, helpful vibe on income collection is definitely yielding results. Flip side of it is, there's always someone out there looking at us for opportunities. And if you were an entrepreneur, would you not cock at the fact that social housing landlords have kept bringing the money in and commercial landlords haven't? And I do wonder if we might see more private sector competitors in this sector than we have in the past, because we are so blinking resilient. Thanks to the efforts of our residents and staff, not happened by magic, but that resilience will not go unnoticed by the forces of darkness, that's for sure.
And we'll touch on that point, but in terms of yourselves as HQN, the work that we're doing with yourselves is we're really trying to get underneath the skin, aren't we? Because it is about support and sharing a best practice. I think that's one thing yourselves do at HQN, and with all the different networks you have, you're constantly going out and engaging with HA and local authorities from a delivery, from a senior management level to political level. And the work we're doing with yourselves is about unearthing what's underneath the skin of the issues and really helping to address that. I mean, how does that make you feel as being a chief executive of head of HQN?
I think one of the secret ingredients, of course, is that the housing sector should not be competing with itself. I mean, there has been some lunatic activity on the development front where housing associations have been outbidding one another. But in terms of the bread and butter of income collection, day-to-day housing management, getting intelligence on decarbonisation, we don't compete. It's much better to collaborate, and that's what we're trying to do at HQN. And of course, Aico, very important on safety and other areas. So we're pleased to be working with you.
I think it's going to be an interesting journey because we've decided to work with yourself because we appreciate the work that you do. We want to support you to grow and develop that really best practice so we can make sure we're supporting the sector in a wider way. But I think it's going to be interesting when we start doing the roundtables. We're very early on to our partnership with yourself and the relationship we're developing. But already you can see just from the questionnaires we're sending out in the next forthcoming weeks and the replies coming back already. It'll be interesting to pick up some of those key topics and identify how we collectively support the sector, that collaborative approach.
Yeah. Well, there's a real positivity out there. I mean, every day you see examples of landlords talking to each other, helping each other, sharing problems, with or without us. The thing that's worrying me at the back of my mind is you go into lots of landlords, you look at what the stock survey says they need to spend, you look at the amount of money they've got available, and that is the Rubicon we need to deal with.
I think with social housing, there's a massive appetite to do right. Everybody, and that's the social housing sector is like that. It's a very caring sector.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to do right by the residents. Everyone just needs a bit of help to get in the right direction and go on that journey. But do you think sometimes, as a sector, we also need to be thinking about out of the sector thinking, things out of the box approach? Or you mentioned the competitiveness.
Yeah.
But do you think we need to do more of that to actually progress social housing forward?
I think anyone that's been in lockdown will have a love-hate admiration for Amazon, won't they? I mean, their ability to deliver goods and chattels at short notice to remote Scottish islands, as well as inner London, is absolutely to be marvelled at. Whether they're a good thing for the economy because of the desolation on the high street is quite another matter. But Amazon's ability to deliver is something we're marvelling at. And when you talk to younger people, they always talk about Monzo and Starling and these challenger banks and all the help those challenger banks give them in managing their money. So I think we have got so much to learn from the good and the ill that Amazon does, and the way in which the challenger banks have used new technology to build very, very effective relationships with our future residents.
I think it's interesting you touched on the technology front. I know we've got loads of stuff around gateways and technology, but COVID has demonstrated that actually using technology and innovation and having that notification going back to residents and back, it's actually been positive. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you do wonder what work will look like in the future, don't you? I think there's a very sterile debate about whether we're going to be in offices or not. And I'd rather not touch on it. I think it's going to be a bit of both, to be honest. Some real concerns on the diversity front if we move away from the office, because traditionally, folk who are in the office get promoted. If women and others with care responsibilities don't go to the office, will they be less visible? Will that set us back on the diversity front? So I think that element's important. But in terms of talking to the residents, on estates, people love to see caretakers. They love to see people walking around doing things. But I would expect that for many residents, the day in, day out humdrum transactions will shift increasingly to remote forms of technology. We just have to strike the right balance between having a visible human presence and other forms. What worries me is that if we know the police numbers are being cut, so you don't see many police in deprived areas. If we start pulling back from going on to estates, what will happen to those areas? Where will the responsible people be for residents to contact in times of trouble? Are we going to revert to a police type approach of turning up in emergency cars when things go wrong? I certainly hope not. I hope we do go back to a lot of stable housing management, boots on ground, shoe leather doing the work, and a highly visible presence.
That's what it was before, wasn't it? When
Yeah.
I remember working at Coventry City Council in Birmingham, neighbourhood management was the be-all and end-all. It was the heart and the link to the external to internal of what you did.
I loved going to see Coventry Housing Department back in the day, because they had, in the interest of efficiency, they'd sublet one of their offices to a dentist, yeah? So you would go there in the early 90s to talk about compulsory competitive tendering, and the atmosphere was heightened by the sound of someone in the next room screaming. So I'm all for going back to Coventry.
That's right. I was there for 2.5 years. It was that's one local authority area. There was about 59 different communities to engage with. Service provision was taken from the council to the community, and it's funny because you see it full circle on, nearly 15 years on, it's all coming back to the same. I think that's what social housing does. It goes round in a circle that ends up where it was before. It's interesting having the same conversations about engagement that I did 20 years ago and still having them. But not, all that's changed is that there's a whole conversation around using technology now.
Yeah. I mean, you finished, you know.
No, but on that note, where do you see social housing in the next 10 years? So if I was to say to you, Alistair, I'll give you a wishing pot. I'll give you what do you call it?
Magic wand.
That's it, a magic wand. A magic wand, or a magic wand, or just a pot where you can. What is it called? I've messed this up, haven't I? A cauldron, not a cauldron. What's
That
it?
thing they. Yeah.
What's it called? The genie who. Yeah. What is that? Oh, let's just look as a magic globe, whatever you want to do, a magic wand.
Yeah.
Where do you see social housing in the next 10 years?
Well, if it's a magic wand, by definition, it's a positive, isn't it? So on the positive front, what I hope is that we find the cash to make the homes safe, warm, and decarbonised. That is for sure. I'd like to see the resident voice taken a lot more seriously, especially in some of the bigger landlords across the country. And one of the reasons for optimism about social housing is that because of house prices in certain areas now, folk are looking very, very seriously at housing associations and councils to solve the problems. At one point in the 70s and 80s, if you said to someone, you worked for a council or a housing association, you are laughed at, yeah? Today, you are seen as a source of help and succour. And I think we need to keep working on the professional attitude. I think the CIH's new professional code is an excellent starting point. We absolutely need to get on the front foot, beg your pardon. We need the resources, and we need to make sure that things like Grenfell never happen again. It's constant vigilance to make sure we're performing at the level we need to be performing.
So I think we've all got to remember, it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't affect just one person, it affects the whole community. And it is that social economic impact it has, and the social impact it has on a community is immense. And I think we never should ever forget that, whether it is regarding what agenda, it's regarding building safety or retrofitting or resident engagement. We're not just serving one person, we're serving a whole community. I think it's that mental attitude as well, isn't it?
And one glimmer of hope, if you look at the mayoral elections in London, the Parliament elections in Wales and Scotland, we've got a battle brewing on how many affordable houses each of the parties will build. And I think that is an absolutely stellar portent for the future.
So the future for you is all about making sure your magic wand says, keeping people warm and safer in their own homes. And the work yourselves are doing, I think it's amazing in terms of the work you're doing with getting into underneath the skin. And where were you looking forward to taking that journey with you?
Yeah, no, I think the two messages are, well, the messages are stellar discipline to make sure we don't repeat a Grenfell, collaboration to drive forward, and all working together to make sure we get the right level of resources to deliver the services that residents will be proud of. And the more successful social housing is, the more we will see of it.
Thank you very much, Alistair.
It was great to hear from Tina Mistry and Alistair McIntosh from HQN talk about what HQN have been up to and the partnership we've formed. Hopefully this partnership will lead into greater things over the coming years, and we can really form a strong bond that benefits both organisations. Now we're going to take a short break and look at our Aico installer community video and why you should sign up.
So you want to join Aico's installer community? To become a member of the community, you must have completed the Expert Installer core module since the 1st of May 2019. Don't worry, if you need to complete or refresh your training, simply sign up to our Expert Installer program online. Our Regional Specification Managers run training sessions across the country in specialised mobile units. Once you have signed up, a member of the Aico team will be in touch to advise you on training courses and dates in your area. Attend your training day, and once completed, we will provide you with access to the community and your chance to win great prizes. If you have completed the Expert Installer core module since the 1st of May 2019, All you need to do is email us at installer.community@aico.co.uk to receive your unique join code. There is a reward for the first 1,000 expert installers to join, and there is a chance to win an all-expenses-paid trip to watch the British Superbikes in Assen, Holland. Get connected and find out more at aico.co.uk/community.
Welcome back. We're now going to go across to one of our regional specification managers, Andy Sturgess, who's going to talk to us about process mapping our SmartLINK Gateway. He'll explain what this is and how to get the best out of the gateway.
Hi there, I'm Andy Sturgess from Aico, Regional Specification Manager for the South, and today we're going to go through process mapping. What we're going to cover is what it is, why you want to do it, and then we'll take you through some examples so you understand the process. So, the reason why we've created a process mapping procedure is what we were finding was that going forwards with IoT solutions, there's a lot of information coming to the organisation. And what people weren't doing was actually figuring out really what they were going to do with it. They was gathering all the information together, they were storing it, it was great, but to get the best return on investment in regards to any form of IoT solution, you need to actually decide what you're going to go and do with the information that you receive. So, first stage of this process is going through the guidance document. Now, as you'll see in a minute, there is a checklist for all the insights, all the data that you're going to be able to receive. And the first thing you've got to do is actually decide what information you want to receive from your installations. I'll give you an example in a minute. You then need to decide on all the relevant contacts and populate your process mapping document. Now, first thing you've got to do here is decide who needs the information. There may be more than just directly related contacts from your organisation who are going to want to know this stuff. So, for example, say you're the electrical manager, obviously you're going to want to know the maintenance elements of it. You're going to want to know things, for example, like a head removal. They've taken a smoke alarm down, you're going to want to know about that. But the call centre might also need to know about this. Yeah. Your compliance manager may also need to know about this. The tenant may need to know about this. So, as you can see from this chart here, just to give you some guidance in regards to all the stakeholders who may want this information, you need to decide on this first. So, the first thing we'll take a look at is the insights checklist, and then we're going to move on to some examples of the process mapping document. So, here's a list of the insights that you can get in regards to your fire, CO, and environmental sensors. So, as you can see there, nice and straightforward. You click yes or no, whether or not you want it. So you've got information such as fire alarm activation, different level of carbon monoxide activation, head removals, mains absence faults, gateway offline, information about button tests, all the way through to condensation, damp and mold risk indicators, void risk indicators, excessive temperatures, and fuel poverty risk indicators. Once you've chosen them, you'll then go through the individual process mapping documents for each insight, and once you've done them, you simply click Process Map Complete. So, this is the process mapping document. As you can see there, on the left, you choose your notification or insight that you're looking at. There's a drop-down menu. This one we're going to choose High CO Level Alarm. Then you've got 4 additional columns. Who receives the information during working hours? Who receives the information out of working hours? The action that you take on receipt of the information, and the end goal and what you want to achieve from the information you receive. So as you can see here, we've got 3 choices for contacts. In this case, in hours, we want the call centre to receive the information, we want Gazman, the gas manager, to receive the information, and we want James T. Kirk, the compliance manager, to receive the information. We also want the customer to know about it, because obviously a high CR level activation isn't particularly good for their health. So on the right, in out of hours, information is pretty similar, but it's going to go to your out of hours call centre, the duty manager rather than the gas manager, because the gas manager might not be the one on duty at the time, and the compliance manager is still going to want to know about it. And obviously, even out of hours, the customer does need to know about this. You then decide on your actions. So in hours, the customer is going to get notified by a call from the call centre to evacuate the property. The gas manager is going to receive the alert for this, and he's going to arrange for an engineer to attend the property as soon as possible. In this case, based on this company's procedures, within the hour. Out of hours, the customer is notified by the out of hours call centre to evacuate the property, and the duty manager arranges for an out of hours engineer to attend as soon as possible. So very similar, but depending on the time of the day, who receives the data varies slightly. Now, what are you looking to achieve from this? So in this case here, obviously the most important part, the customer is made aware of potentially harmful carbon monoxide activation in their dwelling, and they're evacuated to minimise any health risks. The CR activation is investigated and it's rectified, and most importantly left safe. And off the back of it, the compliance manager is aware of it throughout the whole process, so they can ensure all the correct processes and procedures are followed and the case is closed correctly. The next example insight is a mains absent fault from, we'll say, one of your smoke detectors. So, as you can see here, in this case, rather than having an in-house team to respond, this housing association are using an electrical contractor. In an hour's receipt of information, in this case, is exactly the same. It's not a massively urgent call out. The smoke detectors have got a battery backup. So, in this situation here, the information goes to the same people. Now, what actions happen? Well, in hours, the call centre is going to call the customer and ask them to check that the consumer unit hasn't tripped, because obviously that's going to be one of the main issues that's going to cause a lack of main supply. If it hasn't, then the planner needs to call the electrical contractor and arrange a job. Now, as part of the process, the electrical contractor has already been notified to the potential job as they receive the information, but they're not going to respond until they receive a new job ticket from the planner in the housing association. Out of hours, they give the customer a call back in hours and follows the above procedure. It's not an emergency action. There's no need for an out of hours response. Nice and straightforward. Now, what's the end goal from this information? Well, hopefully the call centre rectifies the issue without the requirement from a call out, which is obviously going to save a lot of money. If there is a call out, it can be scheduled for a convenient time, in this case within 24 hours, because it's life safety equipment. And more importantly, the contractor's made aware and has a lot more information for when they're on site. They'll know exactly which detector has that lack of mains problem. So they'll know the part they need to respond with, so that when they get to site, they don't spend time fault finding. They can immediately go to the issue and they can rectify it as soon as possible and be off site as soon as they can. So minimising the inconvenience for the resident and obviously reducing costs as time on site is less. The main goal is that the issue is rectified effectively with minimal disruption to the customer and minimal cost to the housing association. So, the next insight we're going to choose is for condensation, damp and mould. So, a bit different from the life safety equipment we've just been talking about. In this case here, this is more of a monitoring aspect. So, in an hour's receipt of data is going to be the same. But the customer does definitely want to know about this. So, in regard to actions, well, if you say, for example, get a medium or high risk of condensation, damp and mould, then the first thing you want to do is contact the tenant and provide suggestions and recommendations in regards to behavioural change, or ask them if there's any problems with, say, for example, their extractor fan, as it might not be functioning, they might not be using it, and it'll allow you to get a bit more information to get to the root of the problem. You can also push this information through to the resident app and give them advice via that, even further reducing the requirement for even having a call, because they've had that information pushed through to the app on the smartphone. You may also need to arrange a planned visit, and this will be the first point of contact with the resident. If you are getting repeated or continuous high levels of condensation, damp and mould, or the tenant reports it on top of that, you could then send an engineer to assess and confirm the cause of the problem. It may be behavioural, it may be structural, it may be both. If it is an issue, then obviously you can take the correct actions to rectify it. You can also look to prioritise the property in any form of capital investment works to improve the ventilation or repairs if it's needed. Out of hours, as I've already said, the same information is going to be used. It's not an immediate action, it's passed to the in-hours team. Now, what do you want to achieve from this? Well, obviously, your primary goal is you want to reduce the risk level of condensation, damp and mould in all your dwellings to low. So this is going to help you achieve that. And obviously, it's going to improve the internal air quality of the property and improve the health and well-being of your resident. It's also going to improve the quality of the housing, and it's going to reduce maintenance costs going forwards because you're identifying an issue before it does become a structural issue that requires a lot of work to rectify. The last example of an insight we'll give you is for excessive cold or heat or a fuel poverty indicator. Now in this situation here, as you can see again, the different contacts have changed. In this case, the customer doesn't need to know this information. So, who's going to receive it? Well, your health and adult liaison officer, tenant engagement officer, and your energy manager. Now, in hours, what are you going to do with this information? So, it's going to provide you notifications to let you know when these are happening, and via the resident app or by contacting the resident, you can give them advice, for example, so they're either letting their properties get too hot, they're letting them get too cold. Is it due to a faulty heater, or is it due to them leaving their windows open all the time, for example? If they don't respond to the engagement or you're not receiving any information, you can then potentially assess the requirement for any assistance and investigate any potential issues of vulnerability and any other factors you might notice. For example, are they missing rent payments? Are you getting regular lack of main supplies to their property due to running out of electricity on their meter? And you can pull all this information together and using the machine learning via the portal, it'll pull it all together and push you towards that potential problem of fuel poverty. Obviously, it will also allow you to prioritise the property for any investment works to improve thermal efficiency, upgrade the heating to something that's more efficient, or obviously provide any other assistance to the resident. Out of hours, again, this isn't something you need to act on immediately, and it's passed across to the in-hours team. Well, what's your end goal? Well, obviously, the key issue here is you want to reduce the number of cold home notifications you're receiving. And what does this do? Well, obviously, it's going to improve the well-being of your tenants, protect your most vulnerable tenants, and it's also going to help you move towards government-led 2030 fuel poverty targets. So those are some very basic examples of the process mapping procedure. It is designed to be very simple, because if you do start to get complicated with these sort of things, then it's very easy to lose your way. Now, the key issue here is that if you don't do something like this, in regards to your data, your insights that you're going to receive from your IoT solutions, you're not going to be maximising on the return of value, the return on investment from these products. And the other part is you're going to be receiving information that you're going to want to act on. So again, if you want more help with this or assistance with this, be sure to give your local regional specification manager a call, and we'll more than happily either come in and talk to you about it, or jump on a Zoom or a Teams meeting online, and we'll take you through the process. But it is very important that you get all the relevant parties from your organisation involved from the start to make sure you're maximising on this information. Thanks for listening in.
Thank you to Andy for sharing that information about the Gateway.
Yes, it's great to hear from Andy and get a real insight into what the Gateway can provide information-wise. The insights you get from the portal of the Gateway can be a real benefit to your organisation. For any more information about the Gateway, please visit our website or contact your local regional specification manager. But now we're going to take another short break and we're going to share some information about the Gateway. Thank you.
Introducing the SmartLINK Gateway and Cloud Portal service from Aico. A new and innovative product developed with registered social landlords and housing associations, giving you complete control and reassurance when monitoring and maintaining your stock of alarms through SmartLINK Cloud Portal. Easy to set up, the Gateway is a roaming 2G GSM-based device, ensuring maximum connectivity possible without the need for local broadband or Wi-Fi services, increasing efficiency while remaining compliant with legislation. Featuring real-time alarm status, fault status, text alert and email notification capability for both fire or CO and fault events, as well as installation reports and replacement and fault reports. The SmartLINK Gateway and Cloud Portal service is your total solution for alarm maintenance and asset management. The smarter way to check your tenant safety at any time. SmartLINK, a revolution in tenant safety.
Since it's Thursday, we're now going to take a throwback to before Christmas when we hosted our live online event, Smarter Homes, Safer Communities. Our Regional Specification Manager, Gregor Morrison, had the pleasure of hosting a panel discussion regarding the changes to the Scottish standards. During this panel discussion, he invited members from the 4 nations of the United Kingdom to discuss the changes in standards in Scotland and if Scotland were really leading the way for the rest of the UK. Let's take a look at that panel discussion.
Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, what a day it has been at part 2 of our Smarter Homes, Safer Communities event. Following on from powerful talks from Dame Judith Hackett and Colin Todd, I would like to continue focusing on the second part of our heading, Safer Communities. As Colin has demonstrated, for the past 30 years, standards, regulations and legislation has driven our communities throughout the UK and to increase fire safety within its homes. To kickstart us off, I'd like to take us through a short timeline of how these have then adapted. Now, the purpose of this is to help create a picture of how these have developed over a time and a position. Now, I am aware many people watching today are not from a social landlord, fire safety or even a contracting background. So when we do mention LD, we are focusing purely on the level of fire detection within a home. For example, LD3, which you can see marked here, is the lowest form of detection covering all circulation spaces that form part of an escape route. For example, the hallways and landings. As we start the timeline, we see an introduction of regulations within all 4 of our nations, as well as the first publication to the British Standard in 1995. Now, as we move across into the millennium, we then see various amendments to the Scottish Technical Standards, as well as an introduction to the Technical Handbook in 2005. Now, although there were amendments, the level of fire detection remained unchanged. However, as you can see, in 2004, the amendments to BS 583 Part 6 show an introduction of an increase of fire detection within new builds to a category LD2. This addition included a smoke alarm in the main living area, as well as a heat alarm in the kitchen. In 2005, Northern Ireland went one above and introduced LD2 as a regulation for all new and materially altered dwellings in Technical Booklet E. Now, as we move into 2010, we can then see the start of the beginning of what can only be described as our busiest and most decorated decade of standards and regulations. We see the introduction of LD2 come into action in Scotland through the Technical Handbook in 2010, which covered all works that require a building warrant, as well as a private rented repair standard as a minimum for all private landlords in 2015. However, the most notable point to be made is the introduction of CO regulations through the document B for England and Wales. This required all solid fuel burning appliances, such as open gas fires, to be covered by a CO detector. In 2012, Northern Ireland again went one step above and made all fuel burning appliances a requirement in Technical Booklet L, with Scotland following in 2013 through the Technical Handbook. This ensured the likes of gas boilers were protected through new builds and materially altered dwellings. Now, as we then move forward into 2017, the United Kingdom came to a pause to witness its worst ever modern day tragedy, the Grenfell Tower fire. Within 24 hours, a working group was formed within the Scottish Government, which focused purely on building and fire safety. This created discussions around increasing the level of detection within Scotland's homes and what could be done to create safer communities. Now, following reported increase in pressure from the public, it was then laid in Parliament in 2018 that a blanket legislation would be created under the tolerable standard. This would apply to all homes in Scotland and would be effective from February 2019 to February 2021, giving all social landlords, private landlords and homeowners time to comply. In May 2019, we've seen the most recent amendments to BS 583 Part 6, which recommends a minimum category of LD2 across all properties. So, what is the Scottish tolerable standard? Now, as explained before, this applies to all homes in Scotland. It asks that all homes have the following: one smoke alarm in each circulation space that form an escape route, form all parts of the escape route on each storey. So if you have a 3-storey house, all 3 storeys must be covered. One smoke alarm installed in a room most frequently used for daytime living purposes, normally your living room or your lounge. One heat alarm in every single kitchen, and all fire alarms must be interlinked and ceiling mounted. Mains powered alarms and 10-year lithium sealed battery alarms are permitted, which again has been a big talking point in Scotland. The tolerable standard also introduced legislation for carbon monoxide, which required seal detectors to be fitted in all rooms where there's a fixed combustion appliance, such as a gas boiler, as well as any flow that passes through another room. Now, as we move on to the statistics, it not only gives us a clear indication of why the legislation was introduced, but immediate effects it has had. Over 61% of accidental fires started with a cooking appliance, followed by fires caused from electrical equipment within the main living area. Now, currently in Aico, we deal with around 92% of social landlords in the UK and around 96% of social landlords in Scotland. Now, as we can see, all RSLs are currently working to the tolerable standard deadline of achieving LD2 by February 2021. Now, this standard has now likely going to be increased to February 2022. Myself and my colleagues in Scotland are also working hard to assist contractors, homeowners and private landlords to help achieve this deadline as well. As we move over to the recent amendments of BS 583 Part 6, we can see around 67% of social landlords within the UK, including Scotland, have various work streams in place to work towards LD2. Now, it is important to note these are programmes only and do not account for housing stock. However, if we were to remove Scotland from that statistic, you can see that only 56% of social landlords within the rest of the UK are working towards a higher category of fire detection through various properties, with a staggering 43% on the lesser standard of LD3. Now, the one thing I would ask all viewers to think about is what would that statistic read if we were to include all homes in the rest of the United Kingdom? So the question is, can the new legislation in Scotland become a template for the rest of the UK to follow and help create safer communities within our nation? Now, to discuss this further, I'm absolutely delighted to have joining us today representation from all 4 of our nations. We have Andy Graham, who's a business change manager from Fife Council in Scotland. We have Mabel Higgins, who's a fire safety engineer for MH Fire Safety in Northern Ireland. We have Kelvin Evans, who's a fire safety compliance officer for Adra Housing Association in Wales. And Martin Lucas, who is head of fire safety from Guernsey Fire and Rescue Service. Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. How are you all doing? Okay?
Okay. Good afternoon, Gregor.
Absolutely fantastic. We'll dive right in. First question I've got, firstly, what is the views, all your views on the Scottish Government's actions in creating a blanket legislation and the tolerable standard, which applies to all homes and within a deadline? And I'll start with yourself. You've been working towards this deadline since February 2019. What is your views when it first came out? And secondly, how has it been?
Okay, so just to give you a bit of background with Fife, back as far as 2010, through a forum within Fife Council called the Technical Services Forum, we decided to start fitting an LD2 system within homes in Fife. And that carried on until Grenfell happened. And then what happened was we decided at that point that we would increase our installations to a near LD1 installation. Right. So we started fitting, adding on to our hardwired LD2 systems in our high-rise flats with battery detectors added to the system in the bedrooms. Then we discovered after that that you know, if we were going to be doing this for our high-rise tenants, that it would be an idea to actually do it for the rest of the tenants through at Fife. So we started doing that. So when the tolerable standard, when the legislation was announced, we were already quite a way down the road to achieving LD2 right across all our properties. But the challenge that we find is that, as well as our own council properties, we're also within some of our settings, including our high-rise flats, we've got a number of properties with private owners in them. Yeah. So this legislation is only going to support us in ensuring that fire safety is achieved through all our settings within Fife Council. It will bring challenges, and I know that through my involvement with the Select Local Authority Forum, which I chair, where we shared best practice, a number of authorities that were achieving LD3 are now on a road to trying to achieve LD2 in a short period of time. And I fully understand the financial implications of this, but my view is, and I think the view of many in Scotland's local authorities, is that this could only help us get a consistency across Scottish housing to achieve a standard of fire safety that everyone deserves.
Absolutely fantastic, Andy. Thank you. Mabel, what about yourself in Northern Ireland when you first heard that the tolerable standard was first been introduced? What was your thoughts? Not even just in social housing, but in all housing as well.
Yeah, when I first heard about it, Gregor, I had admiration for the Scottish Government and to bring about this change so quickly after Grenfell. Here in Northern Ireland, our requirements for an LD2 system were brought about in 2005 for all new houses. So for the last 15 years, we've been installing that system in new builds. We haven't been doing it in our existing stock, albeit that there's some of the housing associations like Andy have been proactive and have been installing them to a higher standard than what the regulatory requirements were. So my business is about fire safety, it's about saving lives, it's about providing building stock that is as safe as it possibly can be for the people that occupy it and the people that live it. And by introducing the changes that Scotland have brought about helps me to do my job. Because there's no questions, if it's a mandatory requirement, then it's something that is needed. The introduction of fire alarm systems way back in the 80s and 90s was the single most important measure that ever was brought about with fire safety, and it was one single measure that saved the most lives over that timeline. So the numbers of deaths and injuries dropped from thousands down to double digits just by introducing the first suite of changes for fire installation. So I fully expect that any enhancement for that alarm system is going to improve the statistics in the years going forward.
Absolutely fantastic, Mabel. Thank you very much. And Kelvin, Housing Association in Wales, what's been the chat in Wales when this got first introduced, and is it looked upon now? Is it spoke about just now?
Well, yes, firstly, I must say, you know, it's commendable what the Scottish Government are proposing and what they're actually doing. I think it's a change which needs to happen, and obviously I just hope that it's a change which all the devolved governments they take on board and they do follow suit. Obviously there are going to be challenges for Scotland in carrying out this, and you know, they're going to be providing a template for the future, which I hope we can all learn and carry out. And I felt myself and my colleagues that I've spoken to in other housing associations in Wales. You know, it's something which we'll look forward to carrying out ourselves. We do have a large percentage of LD2 properties, and we are at this moment in time, if we do carry out refurbishment, then we look to change from the LD3 systems that we do have to LD2. But again, you know, there are some constraints accompanying that, and that's the position we're in at this moment in time. There was one thing I will add is that I was reading the statistics for the Welsh Fire and Rescue Service for 2019-2020, and they attended approximately 1,500 dwelling fires during this period, and it's frightening to see that a third of those dwelling fires, there was no smoke alarms present. So again, that's a challenge which has to be addressed, and hopefully looking at the Scottish template, you know, it will give some guidance on how that can be addressed in itself as well.
I mean, I think I spoke to you about this before. I mean, initially my father, he was in the Fire and Rescue Service for 25 years, and I think I spoke to yourself, Martin, about this, and he was so, again, when this legislation first came about, again, he was surprised at the length the Scottish Government went to, but he was delighted at it, because anytime he went to a call or anything like that, and the amount of homes he went to that actually never had any source of detection at all, it was incredible. Even going back to our house, my mum and dad's house, we always had a smoke alarm in the living area, as well as the hallways and landings. The vestibule was always covered, as well as a heat alarm in the kitchen as well. So that was kind of norm for us. And again, when he used to go to, he's now retired, but when he used to obviously go to calls, he would notice that there's no form of detection at all in the property. Why do fire safety requirements differ and vary between the nations? So the golden question. So again, we'll start with yourself actually, Martin. So why do these fire safety requirements differ between all of our nations?
Well, you're now talking devolved states, you're talking politics. Some would say a lack of common sense. We would like to say a lack of a common approach. So have one standard that everybody applies, so that you haven't got confusions, that an electrician that installs a system in Scotland to Guernsey and fit the exact same system, the way he fits it in Scotland, he can do it in Wales. And it would just be so much better for industry and for everyone. And we just need to remove that red tape, possibly move to not so much legislation, but technical bulletins, which are easier to update standards instead of waiting 3 to 5 years for new legislation. A technical bulletin can be published a lot quicker. That might be the way to go.
Absolutely perfect, Martin. Thank you very much. Mabel, going to yourself, you know, why do you think that there is, you know, different regulations between the different nations? Why do we not all have one regulation, United Kingdom, we can follow?
Yeah. I agree with Martin. A lot of it's politically driven, some of it's culturally driven. One of the big changes that came about here in Northern Ireland was the introduction of carbon monoxide detectors, and it was a result of a number of fatalities that happened here. They went into the public domain, and the public demanded that this be changed. So there was 2 young men were killed as a result of gas poisoning in Castle Rock in 2010. The public saw that it was unacceptable that there was no carbon monoxide detector beside that appliance. So within 2 years, it was driven through very, very quickly. Now, the system for bringing about legislation, as Martin says, is very complex. There's primary and secondary legislation, and to bring that about, it is a long, drawn-out process.
Yeah.
And it starts, first of all, whether there's public interest, if there's a drive from the ministers, and then it goes as a regulatory impact assessment to see how much it's going to cost and the benefit of it. And then after that, there's public consultation, and then it comes back and it's redrafted, and then there's a committee of people review it, and it gets scrutinised. So even on a singular point like carbon monoxide installation, and it comes into all of the 4 or 5 member states, by the time it goes through the system, comes out the other end, it could be any solution available, because each administration has the autonomy to be able to do whatever they want with each solution. So that, unfortunately, whilst it's good to be have your own opinion on certain aspects, and sometimes things like high-rise blocks of apartments don't apply to certain regions. It's not as big a problem in Northern Ireland as it's going to be in England and London. So there is a variation. There is a political drive. There is a public drive towards what's acceptable. And whenever that's shared out and it goes through all of those processes, unfortunately, it means that there's going to be differences. Yeah. But I do think, even after I said all that, that something as straightforward as fire alarm detection systems should have common approaches across all of the different areas.
Kelvin, maybe that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Kelvin, again, go to yourself just quickly before we finish up. And Andy, should we all have one legislation? Should we all have one legislation that we follow? Kelvin, start with yourself.
Yes, most certainly we should do. You know, and I think what's proven it more than anything is the tragic events of Grenfell have made all the devolved countries and nations sit up and look at things. Why does it take that for us all to react and start to do things? You know, it should be done as the devolved nations all do it together and make certain that, you know, we don't do things. You know, fire safety requirements should be exactly the same across all our nations.
Absolutely perfect. And Andy, just finishing off with yourself there before we go to the networking.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it's the tolerable standard. If it was implemented right across Britain, we've got one standard. Everybody knows what they're trying to achieve. And as Martin said earlier, the one electrician in Scotland can come down to the South Coast thing on their Guernsey and fit the same installation because we know exactly what we're looking to achieve. I was just going to quickly say, revisiting the you know, how quickly you would look to implement that. That would have to be thought about very carefully, because if you try to, well, a council like Fife with 30,000 properties, if we were starting from scratch and somebody said we had 2 years or 18 months to comply, it would be a struggle. So no, you've got to be realistic about what you can achieve and the timescales you can achieve it in.
Listen, thank you all so much.
So it was great to hear from Gregor Morrison and the panellists that participated at our live event before Christmas. It was great to get a real good insight to how the standards have changed through the different countries of the UK and how Scotland are leading the way in fire safety. But you know, that's not all we've got time for on this week's episode. Holly, we have got an FAQ, and what do we have this week?
Yep, as always, Alex, we're rounding up the episode with a frequently asked question. And this week, our technical advisor, Dave Jennings, is going to teach us how to dispose of our alarms safely and correctly.
How to dispose of your alarms. Before, you used to put any ionisations in your household wheelie bin. You could put 6 of these alarms in each bin. Now, under the new WEEE directive, all alarms now need to go back to your collection facility sites. You may need to contact your local council depot to get them to be disposed of.
Thank you to Dave Jennings for taking us through this week's FAQ. Hopefully now you all know how to dispose of your alarms safely and correctly.
That's all we've got time for this week. Another fantastic episode of Aico TV. Before we leave, we'd like to remind you to please vote for us at the Electrical Wholesaler Awards. We have been nominated for 3 categories. The link is at the bottom of the screen now, so please vote. Voting closes on the 30th of April. Please don't forget to follow us on our social media channels. We have
LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok and YouTube.
Yes, we have all those platforms, and please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
And if you'd like to get involved with Aico TV, whether that be submitting a topic or coming to the studio, then please email marketing@aico.co.uk.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you and have you on the channel. That's it for this week, and we hope to see you again soon.
See you next week.
Bye-bye.